Hey, welcome back to the Secret Underground Lair. Now those of you that have been watching the channel have probably seen me using my Bedrail Router Sled a little bit in a couple of projects that I've got. Well, I have another one in the works. A little while ago I built this contraption, modeled on roughly, very roughly, on a tool that was prepared by Izzy Swan, and I'll put a link in the description below to his channel, or maybe a link up, I think it'll go here. A link to Izzy Swan's channel where he made this jig for the table saw for cutting round stock. And quite frankly, this works quite well. I used the jig to create, some of these dowels a little while ago, just as a test. Really impressed that it worked as well as it did. The only trouble I have is, of course, using the table saw. It doesn't leave the finest of finishes, so you got to do a lot of sanding to get it to a point where you want to use it. But I got to thinking, I don't like using this for really long and kind of spindly stuff, and I thought if I had the router in here somehow, then I could actually hold the piece still, and I could use the router and create flutes and beads and all kinds of interesting little marks. So, guess what we're making? A Bedrail Router Lathe. So that's the project I've got on the go right at the moment. So the bed rail will remain exactly as it is. What I'll be doing is propping it up with some legs. As you can see, I kind of got a prototype down here, just temporarily set there. So we'll have a leg set up here, a leg set up down here. And on this end, we'll put a spindle through that can be driven by a drill, so the piece will spin. There'll be an adjustable stop block put in around that can move up and down here to cater for a different length. So if I'm working, for example, on a 29-inch leg, I can set that 29-inch rough stock in here and use the end block to get it positioned exactly where I want. The drill will spin it, put the router in here, and then I can move the router up and down and get that ground down, milled down using the router to exactly the dimension that I want. And then I can take the drill off, and I'll be able to put a little cog on this end that I can adjust one position at a time and move the router along to, for example, put in a flute, or perhaps fix the router in one position, put the drill back on, and drop the router down so that I can now create rings and put beads around a piece this way, or other features around the piece this way, in addition to fixing the piece and running the router up here and putting flutes or beads this way on the piece. Interesting little concept. So, I'm going to make the legs. Onto that now. A number of years ago, I picked up a bunch of these bearings, and I found them very useful on a number of different projects. So this is no different. I'm going to be putting these bearings into our leg. So that'll fit a threaded rod, goes through there. This threaded rod will have a pointed end when I'm done with it, and some nuts on this end that'll be used by the drill to drive it. So this will be the driven end, And I'll have a similar setup on the other end on our movable shaft, or movable block to hold the leg. So that's kind of the mechanics. I've taken our front leg, which is going to be the driven piece. It'll have two pieces. These will sit in between these two pieces, but I have tacked them together with my nailer, just so that I can drill and holes to set these bearings exactly where I want them to be. So I have drilled a pilot hole right where I want it. Now I'm going to go use a Forstner bit to drill in deep enough to set this bearing inside this piece. We'll drill another hole on this side to set a bearing on that piece, and then we'll use another drill to go through the thickness of this threaded rod, plus a little bit. So over to the drill press. I don't have a Forstner bit exactly the right size, but a 7/8 inch spade bit is going to give me really, really close. And I think I may just put a little piece of electrical tape around the bearing, and that'll keep it in really snug in the hole. Okay, there's our recess for a hole on both sides of the block. Now we'll just drill a hole through, right through both of that, through both pieces, to accommodate the threaded rod. So here's my bearing, and here's the hole that we cut. The hole is just slightly large for the bearing. So I've wrapped the bearing in electrical tape, and now I'm just kind of cutting off that, the excess. A good sharp blade makes the difference here. So a nice clean edge on that bearing. We'll do the other side. Actually, what I'll do is I'll slip it in first and then trim it off once it's in. So that electrical tape is just enough to make that a firm fit. Now I can go around with a knife and just trim that off. Get rid of the excess. And there's the bearing setting in nice and firmly. I'm also going to be putting in a little, a tiny washer and a screw just to keep it in place so it doesn't slide out, but we now have a bearing in both sides, and a threaded rod will fit right through and spin nicely in that bearing. So I think we're ready. So here is the power end. You can see that that now spins. And it'll be driven by a drill over here on this end, clamped onto that. I'll put some nuts on here too that would let me run it with a driver bit rather than just kind of gripping with the chuck. It'll be a little bit better join. And I'll be drilling a hole through here and running a bolt down. I'll drill another hole in here so I can put in a barrel nut. Do that on both sides to hold that firm onto the bed rail. And down at this end, we have a piece that's attached to another piece of plywood supporting this end. And this end will just be held in with a couple screws running through here into that piece. And that's just a foot. There's no significant work on that. The next piece that I'm working on is the little block that's going to sit in here that will be holding this pointy spindle bit. This represents the other end of the, holding up the other end of the piece that we're going to be turning in this router lathe. So that'll be mounted on a block that moves back and forth, slides back and forth here, and will be clamped in place as needed, depending on the length of the piece being worked on. So I'm just cutting up some pieces for that now on the table saw. I'll come back when I have that ready to show you. So here are the loose pieces for the end of the router lathe. This will be holding the adjustable piece. So this will be glued and nailed in like so. These pieces come in like so, just to provide some support. The piece is upside down currently, so that'll flip around and slide underneath the rails. So I'll just glue and nail that in place now. Okay, so there's our end piece, our adjustable end piece, kind of roughly assembled and roughly put in place. I'm now working on, so that will be able to slide up and down here. The trick now is, how do you clamp it into place? So here's the plan. I have a piece of angle iron here that I'm going to use to go underneath the piece, like that. And then we'll take this piece of iron here, I'm going to cut that into two pieces. You can see where the cut marks are. And that'll be welded on, so this piece is going to be cut in half. So I'll have one piece welded on here and the other piece welded on this separate piece. And this then will become a clamp, sits on top like this, being welded underneath, kind of like that. Oops. So kind of be welded in place like that. Then I drill a hole where those little black dots are, tap that out, and then I can run a bolt through there, and that bolt will tighten the whole assembly and bring this piece up tight underneath the bed rail. So we'll give that a shot. First, cut these guys, cut this in half, and then we'll weld it together. Alrighty, so there's a bracket, welded and just kind of loosely placed. That's what it looks like after doing some processing. So next step will be drill a hole here and tap it for a quarter 20 thread. But conceptually, you can see how that's going to work. As the bolt tightens down, it'll pull this up and clamp that in place. And yes, there certainly is lots of clearance here for the router to get by. All right, I got our piece marked, center punched, got the right bit in the drill for a quarter 20 thread to tap. It's a 13/64 bit, if anybody's wondering, a 5mm to be metric. And let's cut this. Holes drilled, back to the vise, and we'll tap those out. Of course, one of the challenges with tapping a hole is making sure you get your tap going in straight to begin with. This is why frequently you'll see people starting these in a drill press. But I'm going to take a risk here and just go for it. And I know WD-40 isn't really proper cutting oil, but it is oil and it does help. Okay, let's see how these actually clamp our piece in the Bedrail Router Lathe. Gonna have to get used to saying that. Well, there we are in place. That's just finger tight. Plenty of clearance for the router to slide by. Mind you, the router should only come up about that far anyway, so that'll be controlled by stop blocks. But yeah, so that's good. Got some good movement. Got an ability to spin. We're nearly ready to do a test. I just want to anchor in our foot up here and our foot at the other end. And I'm going to put some little guides in here just to keep this piece centered and straight. There is an opportunity at the moment, because nothing is squared up here, for this to slip a little bit. So we'll get this straightened away. That's one foot anchored on firmly. Now we need to do the other end. Okay, next piece, trying to get this guy to be positioned constantly parallel. I was originally thinking to put in a little bit of some guides like this, but I have very little clearance with the Bedrail Sled. So what I'm looking to do, maybe this isn't even going to work. Well, actually it will work because I'll go down low. What I'm going to be doing is putting in some finishing nails, and then I'm going to cut them off just proud of the wood so that they will guide in there and provide clearance for this. I have about 1/8 of an inch where they can come up. So that's all I really need to get into the wood, is about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to mark where I want to put these, drill a little pilot hole, put them in, and then cut them off just about 1/8 of an inch proud. And that will make sure that this sits properly within the rails, centered, and as I slide it up and down, it'll keep its orientation. So let me mark those holes now. These finishing nails just basically become pins, small guide pins. Okay, I can take this piece off now, drill some pilot holes for those to go in, and then mount the pins. Okay, holes drilled. Now I'll just put in a pin. Okay, that's our pins. Let's see how that works. That's going to work perfectly, actually. That's going to work perfectly. Held firmly in place, but just exactly what I want. Okay, I'm going to go cut those off at about 1/8 of an inch. I just use a cut-off wheel on my grinder and be back in a second. So there's the pins cut right down. They actually penetrated on this side, but that's okay. So they're just proud enough to provide some grip against the rails, or some guidance against the rails rather, and still provide clearance for the sled. So, I am ready to give this a whirl. All right, so here's the concept. I've got the drill connected onto our shaft, and as I spin it, I have a little test piece that I've mounted in the Bedrail Router Lathe. So as I spin that, Now I can bring the router down, and just by going a little bit at a time, I should be able to take a good nibble off that and eventually make it round. Let's give it a try. All right, you're seeing this live. I have the drill triggered on, just going slowly. I'll turn the router on and drop the bit down just a little wee bit until it starts touching. You're seeing this live, so let's see how it works. All right, we are definitely working. We've been taking a little bit off here. It is round. Well, how about that? So I think a couple things that can be done faster. One is spin the drill a little faster, so I'll probably do that. It is important to go kind of slow. I'm using just a 1/2 inch flat bit. But I'll take another couple passes off this, and we're just taking this piece of rough wood that I cut. It's actually a former deck board, pressure treated deck board, but I'm just using that as a sample. But it's making a square piece round. How about that? I'll do a couple more passes and I'll show you the final result. Okay, made a couple more passes and look at that. We have a round piece. Now that's what happens when of course, when I'm spinning this piece. But with this tool now, I can actually hold this piece steady, run the router sled back and forth along the piece, and I could create flutes, rotate it a little bit, and I can put templates, fundamentally a dividing head on this end, and make multiple flutes, beads, whatever I want on a piece like this. I can also hold the router sled steady and spin it around and put beads or flutes running horizontally, well, running around the log. So lots of opportunity for this, and of course, you know, CNC would come into play somewhere down the road where you spin the log, spin the piece slowly and move the rotor up and down, and you start creating spiral stuff, kind of rope cuts. But you know, that's getting way ahead of myself. So how about that? Bedrail Router Lathe. Hey, like and subscribe. Now I can get back to the Julia table and finish off the legs.